So today we're going to look at how to do DBQs based on popular responses. I feel as though that people would like to go over how to do this better. So what we're going to do is look at how to write a DBQ better. First of all, step one, read the prompt. What is the prompt asking you to do, and how does the prompt want you to do it? Step two, read the documents. And then step three, look for connections for the ways to connect this to the prompt. So here's our prompt over here. So what you want to do is take these, and you want to connect them, just like that. Those are your goals. That's step 1 and 2. This is the most important part of reading. Then they're ready. So other things to look at. So when they're asking you to do that essay, they usually give you instructions how to go about do it. So the other things you want to look for is respond to the prompt of historical defensive thesis. So this is not a summary. This is a new idea, something new. You're going to make an argument about this. So in the case, let's look at our prompt up here. Evaluate the extent to which ideological rivalries between the Western countries and the Soviet bloc led to political instability or conflict in Asia in the period 1945-1989, or the Cold War. So what you're going to do is create an argument that is new about this. What about the Cold War and Asia can you say based on your documents? That is what your goal is. You want to write something that is newish about this. Next thing, you want to describe the broader historical context. This is the context. So when I talk about you need to have a context, this is what you're talking about. What is the situation which brings this? So what is the situation that we're in here? So what is the situation we're in here? This is the Cold War. So obviously it has something to do with this. You can talk something about like why Asia, why was there political instability, some nationalist movements, things like that. Background information that makes Asia an important place. Use one additional piece of historical document, so something outside of your documents. This right here. This is one of the points which you can gather, which most of you didn't, is you want to use one historical piece of information outside of this. For at least 3 documents, explain how or why the document's point of view. So how does the perspective of this matter? And then for documents to collaborate, and then use evidence to collaborate, quantify, or to expound on the point being made. So essentially what you're doing is one, you got to create a claim which is newish about the prompt. Second of all, describe the context. This is what you remember you start your essay off. The essay is step 1. So part 1 is context. 2. That's what you're going to do. So your context is the broader historical context. So this is number 2 on here. What is the situation in which this events are taking place? And then 2 is your thesis, a defensible thesis. Something is newish that you're going to say about this that isn't a summary of the documents. You cannot summarize documents nor restate the prompts. Do not restate the prompt. So by rearranging the words, you have not written a thesis. And then when you're reading all the documents, think of what could be added. What else could be added to this? And for these 3 documents, explain the point of view. How does the author of these documents matter to what you're reading? And then use evidence to collaborate. So based on your historical knowledge, what evidence do you have to connect these documents to your thesis? So when we look at the thesis, first thing you want to do, step 1, is evaluate. That's what you want to do. 1 is you want to evaluate what is being said. Step 1, evaluate. And then evaluate how, to what extent, how far did it go? How much of a factor was rivalries between the West and the Soviet Union in creating conflict during this time period? And then did these rivalries create conflict in Asia, or was these conflicts in Asia separate from what is already existing? And the time period is the Cold War, end of World War II, till the end of the Cold War. Fall of the Berlin Wall. So that's what you want to do with context. So what you want to do is look at our first document over here. Document number 1. Document number 1 is a letter from the Polish ambassador to North Korea. And he's currently located in Warsaw. What year? 1952. 1952, if you look it up, would be Korean War. 1952 1950 to 1953. So this ambassador is writing during the Korean War. So, is this important? Maybe. It's for you to decide. So, he's writing during. So, what is he saying? Comrade, I am sending you some news from Korea. There's no major changes in the front here. So, essentially, the Polish ambassador is ready to report on what is going on in the war during 1952. The front line remains essentially the same. So, he's talking about what's going on. The Americans have again been putting strong pressure in certain sectors where communist allies are pushing back on all attacks. Communist armies. By communist armies, he's talking about the Chinese and Koreans. Poland assistance to Korea is very modest, so Poland is not doing very much and insufficient. The Koreans expect greater help from us, a country of 25 million people. I want to tell you how other Eastern European countries are assisting them. But I will not bring up the Soviet Union and China. So as we talked about before, the Soviet Union, this is basically Russia and China. So Russia would send equipment, technicians, pilots, things like that. China was dressing up soldiers as Koreans and marching across the border to stop the United States. Romania has included hospitals, and then supplies everything hospital needs checks are sending quantities of medicine. So some of the Eastern Bloc is sending medical supplies. And in light of this assistance of these countries, it would be good for us to send some machines or processing metals to send together the master blacksmiths. So essentially, what Poland is writing about is how the conflict is drawing the entire communist world in there. The Chinese are helping, the Soviets are helping, the Romanians are helping, the Czechs are helping, but the Poles aren't doing anything during the Korean War. So since Poland was industrial, they're saying send industrial supplies. So what could they use as industrial supplies? Well, when the war is over, they can rebuild, or they could use these industrial supplies to build more equipment. So if you're evaluating to what extent conflict in ideology is impacted, well, in the case of this document, ideology is impacted because the Poles feel pressured to send supplies because they're communists and all the other communists are sending things. Poles feel pressure to help. This is the reason for this document. So, in what way did ideology increase the conflict? Well, in this case, due to everybody else that was on their team helping, they felt as though they needed to contribute towards the war effort. Because if they didn't, people in Korea or in China or in the Soviet Union would make fun of them for not trying hard enough, not doing their part for their fellow comrades. So that's one of the ways you can use that one. See how you dissected it. Who is it from? Where is it going? And what is the purpose? What is he saying? Does this work with this? And then another part of this, which points to which team they play for, is the proletarian greetings. So greetings from your favorite your fellow proletarians, which clearly makes them Soviets. Another thing this talks about, identifies, is how the Soviet bloc, even though it was perceived as being one whole, they apparently work individually as individuals. All right, so let's look at the next one. All right, document 2. All right, this source from Oleg Blogomov, director of the Institute of Economy in the World Socialist System. So, once again, this is from the Russian point of view, World Socialist Systems, the Soviet Academic Research Center-based model that reports committees, Communist Party, and the KGB. So essentially, this committee does research for government. All right, introduction to Soviet troops in 79. So 79 is obviously about Afghanistan. Afghan War, the Soviet one. So there's essentially he's talking about what the introduction of Soviet troops have done. Struggle to buy opposition against the Soviet support Afghan government. The Islamic fundamentalists have sharply stepped up their propaganda activities among the population. After the introduction of Soviet troops, the United States, their allies, some of the Arab and Muslim countries, also China announced their support for the opposition. So already, right here, we have some things to look at. So this is obviously from the Soviet point of view. And so how does ideology further the conflict? So the United States, right here. The United States is obviously the Western power and their allies, along with some Arab and Muslim countries, are allying against them. So these guys will clearly work against him because not communists. But the surprising thing here is China. So the thing with this one is in 79, the Sino-Soviet split had already happened. And this is when China and Russia are not getting along. So. It already happened. So ideologically, once again, it's leading to conflict. Because Russia and China aren't getting together and not getting along, China sides with the Mujahideen and the United States, and then the other Arab nations, which are not part of the Soviet sphere of influence. So automatically right there, we have more conflict in Afghanistan just because the Soviets are involved. And so thus, the Western powers or non-Russian, non-Soviet powers are allying against them to stop them. And then ideologically, the reason why a lot of Arab countries turn against them is because of the solidarity of Islamic nations against non-Islamic nations. So since Russia isn't a Muslim nation, it's a communist/atheist nation, they find it in their best interest to resist Soviet invasion and help out the Mujahideen. All right, the advantage of these actions turned out to be insignificant. First, and address confrontations of two fronts in Europe against NATO and East Asia against China, and a third dangerous hotbed of military political tension on the southern flank arises. Second, our influence in the non-alignment movement in the Muslim world. So essentially, this is talking about all the problems that Russia is facing due to ideology. And then you have the non-alignment movement. It's another thing to look at. This is a grouping of essentially nations which are not part of either the Western or Eastern. Once again, ideological. So I'll list some of them for you. So 1, Morocco. 2, Egypt. 3, Indonesia. 4, India. 5, Slovenia. So these are just a couple. Also, got involved with this. There are several more, but those are the basics. Those are the ones you need to know about. So Morocco, Egypt, Indonesia, India, Yugoslavia, and Ghana. Yugoslavia is the only one which is a fellow communist nation, so they are communist. India, Indonesia, Egypt, Morocco. So these groups right here are working against them, suffer considerably, especially in the Muslim world. The non-alignment movement was very popular in the Muslim world because they felt betrayed both by the Western powers and their desire for oil, and the Soviets and their desire for get rid of religion. Also, another impact of ideology is the sanctions. Sanctions against the Soviets because of the war. Technological pressure. So in 1979, this is when the United States starts updating their military. They start adding things like so this is another way that ideology is driving conflict. So essentially, what this document, what Oleg Bogomolov is saying is that due to our ideological position, we're making enemies all over the world. So the non-alignment movement, the Islamic world, we're making enemies because the Afghanistan problem, the United States is stepping up its military spending, our sanctions are hurting us economically, and this is becoming a real problem for us. All right, so let's move on to our third one. third one. This is the last one we're going to look at, because at this point you basically get how this works. So, oops. So this third document is written by Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping is the premier of China after Mao Zedong. All right, so what does this guy say? So this is Deng Xiaoping. So he's Chinese, the supreme leader of the Communist Chinese Party, led a speech delivering in the army following the suppression of. So this is during Tiananmen Square. This is the big deal. All right, Deng Xiaoping. Comrades, you have been working very hard. First, I express my profound condolences to the commander and the fighters, the People's Liberation Army, the police force, and public security forces who died a heroic death fighting the. First of all, he's thanking all those who died fighting the unarmed protesters in Tiananmen Square. Because the international climate is most advantageous for us to have a large group of veteran commanders who are still alive. They have also he's talking about the Sino-Viet War. Still alive. They have experienced many storms that is a stroke. And so the current climate, what he's referring to is the West is not happy about Tiananmen Square. So he has lots of commanders from the Sino-Viet War, and he's saying we're going to need those due to what's going on. There's Western influence on their society. They're known as they support us in actions that counter rebellion, such as Tiananmen Square. The main difficulty in handling the incident has been that we have never experienced such a situation before. We are a handful of bad people mixed with some young students, onlookers, and incident may become very clear soon it broke out. First topple the Communist Party and together overthrow the socialist system. Their goal is to establish a totally Western-dependent bourgeois republic. Naturally, in carrying this out, our reform and opening the country to the outside world. The outside world never influenced the American criticized the president. So what he's saying here is that Tiananmen Square is a big deal because it is the West putting pressure on their Soviet utopian system. And so since they are communists, the world is after them and they hate them. So this essentially does the conflict within China relate to the ideological shift? The answer is yes. People are rebelling because they don't want a communist country. And China is seeing problems around the outside world because they feel as though the outside world is trying to crush their communist utopia and bring about a bourgeois society that could be easily dominated by the United States or other Western powers. So the answer to this one, yes, it brings conflict. So what we looked at today is how to take apart documents and how to look things step by step. Those are things we'd like to do when looking at documents. We will obviously practice more on this. So if you have any questions, let me know. Use the old Google Chat or the old Google Meet.